In previous submodules, we talk about how we are reorganizing the ideas into groups and how we are trying to identify them uniquely to refer to different ideas. And then on the next part, we talk about how these different ideas can be retrieved and simulated in different manner in our mind. So what is the purpose of doing all these efforts of organizing these ideas into groups, classifying them, or refer to different terms to relay or portray a particular idea, and to simulate these concepts in our minds using different representations? Now you can imagine thinking, what for? What are all these efforts for? Of course, these things has to have some purpose. And when we are using these mental representations of what the things that we're learning from our environment when we engage in our environment, we of course have to mentally act on these mental representations. And in our mental representations, whatever we represent of different ideas, it can influence how we judge the idea, and then eventually it can influence how we decide and act on these mentally represented ideas. So, how do we act on our mental representations? I'm going to provide you with different examples or scenarios we usually encounter that can trick us when we're trying to represent a particular idea. We may think of one fact, but in two different represented means. For example, in marketing labels of, let's say, milk cartons, we may notice 98% fat free, and another label is contains 2% fat. As a matter of fact, they are the same. They convey the same idea. And yet, the way it is represented becomes different. We become more sensitive to a particular idea that one framing may convey more than the other. Here's another example. Imagine you've been diagnosed with lung cancer and your doctor gives a choice of two treatments. So here's the set of options first and set of options on the other one. Set A options: surgery which has 90% post-procedure survival rate and a 34% 5-year survival rate. Second option on first set, radiation which has 100% post-procedure survival rate and 22% 5-year survival rate. Okay. On the next set of options, you are given, again, you have the same scenario, surgery which has a 10% post-procedure fatality rate and a 66% 5-year fatality rate. The second option is radiation, which has 0% post-procedure fatality rate and 78% 5-year fatality rate. Among two different sets, we're expecting that you will decide consistently, but the way we are receiving information on two different sets of options, radiation seemed to be very attractive on the first set, but is less attractive on the second set. But if you look at the facts of the statistics on the treatment, they convey the same idea. And yet, the way they are represented, the way they are framed, kind of lead us differently on the way we accept, digest, or judge the information that we're receiving from this set of options. Here's another example. This is a famous problem in philosophy, particularly in logic. Linda is 31-year-old single, outspoken, and very bright woman. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she also participated in anti nuclear demonstrations. Among the two statements, who do you think Linda is? Is she a bank teller or is she a bank teller who is active in the feminine movement? The same scenario for Bill, you have a description of him being strong in mathematics but weak in social studies and humanities. Are you more inclined to think that Bill is an accountant or that Bill is an accountant who plays jazz for a hobby? In explanation to this, we can refer to what it is called later on, but the important matter here is how do we incorporate the information that we get from this narrative of who Linda is and who Bill is when we try to think of probabilities that the particular person is X or a particular category. Are they a member of a particular category? What is the probability of it that Linda belongs to a particular category and on another category? And let's say Bill, what's the probability that Bill is a member of one category, let's say being an accountant, and then on top of that, you have the probability on top of being an accountant is some character about Bill. Here's another example. So here's the problem. Assume that you are presented with two trays of black and white marbles, a large tray that contains 100 marbles, and a small tray that contains 10 marbles. The marbles are spread in a single layer on each tray. You must draw out one marble, of course, without peeking from either tray. You need to draw a black marble. So you're given a choice whether you would like to draw a black draw a marble on the large tray or on the small tray, and the goal is to get a black marble. So it's the higher probability that you will get a black marble on on a large tray or on a small tray. Since you were given a goal, which is to get a black marble, you are now concerned which tray would give you a higher probability that you will get the black marble. Okay? Considering this condition, which the small tray contains one black marble and nine white marbles on the large tray. Okay? Which one would you pick? So in these problems, we are referring to framing, conjunction fallacy, and denominator neglect. On the framing, we are referring to the milk carton example in the surgery and radiation options. The way question or information is formulated can influence how you think of the particular information. For example, if you are conscious of the contents of fat in your milk, you are more likely to be inclined or to be more attracted to buying this milk carton with this label. Let's say, if all else being equal, you have the same set of labels, same nutrient contents, same packaging, and everything. And then if the label 98% fat free and contains 2% fat are the only things that differ in two different labels, we should expect that there will be equal preferences for the both of them. Let's say if we have 100 people allowed to get one from these two different labels, we should expect that it should be equal. But it turns out that people tend to prefer this first label than the other one. So it has some effect on us just because of the way it is framed, how the information is framed. The same way in this example, we should be able to have a consistent choice regardless of the framing. So if I choose, let's say, surgery, this is your competency when it comes to thinking about risks. If I'm willing to uh, undergo surgery, which has 90% survival rate, then I should be also attracted to or inclined to answer surgery, which has 10% fatality rate. But these are emotionally charged terms, fatality, survival. And now we become very cautious and very aversive when it comes to how we are presented with these different ideas, despite the fact that they are the same mathematically, but how we are dealing with the information in terms of the emotions that we gather from it becomes different. And therefore, because we feel more frightened on one thing and feel hopeful on the other, we might have inconsistent preference between the two sets of options. And then for the conjunction fallacy, we are referring to multiple events being independent. But in this case, we are so inclined into thinking that the narrative is so consistent with the character, and therefore we are combining two independent events into one. And therefore we are more inclined to think that Linda is letter B and B Bill is we are more inclined to think of the option B as well for Bill. But if we're going to think about it statistically, the probabilities are higher if the options were A, if the event is only one, instead of two independent events being observed at the same time. And lastly, I think this is the most apparent one. We are just referring to the fractions. But when we look at them, it can be tempting to lean into the larger tree because it has larger absolute number of marbles, of black marbles. So that's really interesting. With the way we are presented with the same idea, but having different stimuli on the way it is presented to us, our mental representation of them being different will now have a subsequent set of ideas coming in and can therefore have a different mental action, such as our judgment and decision making afterwards. So if we are not being conscious or very aware of these things, we can be easily persuaded by marketing tactics. As a matter of fact, I'm also a victim, or I'm not really a victim, but I also fall into those tactics wherein I received a reframing of the cost of a particular product. Let's say the product is it costs around 2,000 pesos and I'm unwilling or I do not feel attracted to acquire that particular item or particular service. But when it was framed to me that it's only 5 pesos a day, and then my eyes suddenly popped up thinking that, oh, that's trivial and I can get the benefit with such a trivial cost, thinking that it's 5 pesos a day. When it was framed to me that way, I was led on to a decision that is against my interest. So we can be easily persuaded by these marketing tactics just because of the way the information is represented differently. So for recommendation of books, I'd like you to read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Thinking and Reasoning by Ken Mantello. That's the end of this module.